In this how-to video for NVRs, we'll go over how to set up your NVR, how to install a hard drive, how to add a camera, and how to configure the NVR for your network. You can pause the video as we go along as needed. You can also skip ahead or come back to different parts of the video by selecting the chapter in the video description below. Today we're going to take a look at these NVRs, or network video recorders. We're going to look at two different types today. One's a PoE, which stands for Power over Ethernet, which will allow you to plug your camera directly into the video recorder and supply power to the camera. The other type is a Non PoE, which will require you to either supply a separate PoE switch, a injector, or even a wall plug to power the camera. We'll go over the differences and show you how to connect the camera to each one. You can see that there's minor differences between the recorders besides where the RJ45 plugs into the recorder. You can see here where the alarm inputs and outputs are. On the non-PoE, you have to supply your own 12 volt. With the PoE power supply internally, it does have a connection for a 12 volt connector. The main difference between the recorders is the PoE is a plug-and-play unit where you can actually just plug the cameras in, it'll initialize the cameras, and you'll have a live feed. Versus the non-PoE NVR, you'll have to initialize each camera and set the cameras up individually. We'll take a look at installing the hard drive into the PoE NVR. Regardless which one you choose, they're pretty much the same as far as installing the hard drive. What we'll do is we'll start and we'll remove the back screws. You can see there's 4 screws that hold the cover on. I'll remove them and take the lid off. After removing the screws, I'll slide the cover towards me. I'll take the cover off and carefully set it down so I don't scratch it up. And we can take a look inside of the recorder. You can see you have the power supply, 2 cards. One is the PoE and one is the main board. What we'll do now is install the hard drive. With this recorder we have a space for 2 hard drives, one here and one here. Depending on what model you have, you could have anywhere from 1 up to 8 hard drives. When you install the hard drive, you just have to make sure that you have the plug side facing the middle of the NVR so you're not sitting on its cables. And if it goes on the other side, we'd just turn it over and install it that way. You can see the screws that came with it. These are regular hard drive screws and they're in the pack of the NVR box. We'll install 4 screws to the bottom of the NVR. Use caution that your ribbon cables or any other cables are not going to be underneath the hard drive so you don't pinch them when you install them. Again, you want to make sure the plugs are pointing towards the center. We'll turn it over and you'll see that the screws line up to the mounting holes. And we'll install our screws. After your hard drive's installed, we'll plug in the power cable and the SATA hard drive cables. You can see that this power cable is a dual, so it splits and you can have one for each hard drive. That's going to plug into the main board and it's directional with the clip on it. So just plug it in, don't force it. Now that the power cable is plugged into the main board, we'll plug the power cable into the hard drive. You'll see that it's an L-shaped cable, so use caution when plugging them in, and they can only go in one way. And we'll take one of the SATA cables, we'll plug that in. It doesn't matter if it's into number 1 or 2. Again, these are directional and they will only go in one way. And plug that into your hard drive as well. What I like to do is I like to put the other SATA cable in even though we're only going to use one hard drive. And then I like to tape those down so that way when you go to add another hard drive, you don't search for your cables. Then I'll just put a piece of tape on there to secure them so they don't rattle around. Now we can go ahead and put the cover back on. Line it up with the front and put your screws back in. You can see now that I have the cover on, we'll take a look at a couple different things with this recorder. You have where your cameras are going to hook up to the PoEs, and then this is your LAN cable that's going to go back to your router if you put it on your local area network. You can see there's a USB cable. You can either connect a mouse or a USB stick to get the recordings off. You also have a VGA or an HDMI. On these recorders you can actually have two different monitors, one HDMI and one VGA. You have an on and off switch, you have the fan, and you also have your alarm in and outs. You do have a audio in for a microphone and an audio out for a set of speakers if you'd like to hook up. Now that I have the hard drive installed, I'm going to hook up a monitor so you can see how to continue setting up the NVR. I could connect it directly to the PC with a LAN or into my network, and after setting the correct segment on my PC Ethernet card, I could log in directly to the NVR with the default IP address of 192.168.1.108 and continue setting up the NVR. For demonstration purposes, I will use the monitor so you can see. So I'll plug the HDMI in and power up the unit. Once your recorder boots up, you'll be asked to select a region of your area. We'll select United States. We're going to do English, and it automatically goes to NTSC. We'll press next. You'll agree. Press next. You'll select your time. You can set your time. You can select your date. Here we'll use an admin password. You click on the box and type in your password. After your password is typed in, you have to confirm the password. You also can put a password hint in if you'd like. Press next to continue. This is an unlock pattern. This allows you to connect the dots to draw a pattern, and it replaces the need to enter your password every time. Click the left mouse button and hold, and then drag to the dots that you choose. You'll confirm this pattern a second time. You can see I drew an S here for my unlock pattern. And now I can do this instead of logging in with a password every time. But if you forget what this is, you can use your password as well. The next screen is going to ask you if you'd like to put in your email address, so if you need to reset your password, you can. For this demonstration, I'm not going to set that. You also can set your security questions if you'd like, and this will allow you to reset your password with the reserved email and answering the security questions. We'll uncheck the auto check for updates. It's not very reliable, and you can just uncheck that and press next. Here we'll just pretty much leave it the way it is. You can change the logout time, so after 10 minutes it does not log you out. For me, I'll set this 0 for right now. That way it never logs out and I don't have to log back in throughout this demonstration. After I change the logout time, I'll go ahead and press next. This will let me Set the time again. It also lets me choose if I want the format. For me, I like to use the month, day, and year. And you can see it changes us at the top. The time format down here, you can select the 12-hour time format or the 24-hour day. You can also go in and set the daylight savings time here, turn it on and change the dates and the time if you'd like it to automatically switch. The NTP is a time server that allows the NVR to reach out to the NTP server and automatically adjust the time. We'll press next and press next. Now we come to the network screen for the NVR, and this is where I'll check my segment on my NVR and on my network so they both work together. There are many different ways to set up your network for your surveillance system. We're going to set up the most simplistic network so you can connect to your cameras from your cell phone app. If you do connect your network to the internet, it's highly recommended that you do it by a secure manner, by either a VPN, a virtual network, or some other means that prevents unauthorized access to your network. You can research this and configure your network accordingly. We'll go ahead and show you how to configure your NIC card in the NVR to the same segment as your network. To get started with a PC that's connected to your network, right-click on the Start button and click Run. In the Run box, type CMD and press Enter. This will open the command prompt. When our command prompt opens, we'll type in ipconfig/all and press Enter. This will bring up our network information that we need. If you're having trouble bringing up the command prompt, go to the bottom toolbar and click on the network icon. Click the network and it'll bring up your network settings. Click on your network adapter and scroll down. You will then see your IP address in the network settings. It will be listed as the IPv4 address. Write this number down as we will use it when we set up our IP address for our NVR. To determine the segment, we look for the third octet, or third set of numbers. In this case, it is a 1. If we go back to the NVR where we left off, we look at the IP address of the network card for the NVR. We can see that the third octet is also a 1. That would mean our NVR and our PC are on the same segment, and they would be able to communicate with each other over the network. If the segment on your PC and the NVR do not match, then click the Modified button and go down to the IP address. You can see that in this case the ones match. If it doesn't, change it to match what our network segment is. You'll then have to drop down and change the default gateway. You can see here that it's on 192.168.1.1, which is the correct segment. If it is not on the same segment, you'll have to change the gateway. That's why it's nice to bring up the command prompt and get the gateway information as was shown from the beginning of the network tutorial. We also are going to change the last number, which is the IP address of the NVR. Normally you can choose anywhere between 2 and 254. You can press the test button to see if it's available or already taken up by something else on your network. You can think of the gateway as the bridge between your LAN, which is the local area network, and the WAN, the wide area network, or the internet. Here are some samples of some common IP addresses and gateways. Each one is going to be different depending on what router you use and who set up your network. A common mistake people make is not setting up the correct segment to their network. The segments have to all match or they will not communicate with each other on your network. Once we have successfully completed our network setup for our NVR, we can click Next. It'll bring us to a P2P screen. If enabled, this will be the easiest way to add the NVR to your phone app, DMSS. We can click Next and go to the camera list screen. With the PoE NVR, they're pretty much plug and play with your cameras. So what I have is a camera, an IP camera. I'll plug it in with an Ethernet cable. And plug it into the back of the NVR. It doesn't matter what port I plug it in the back of the PoE, as long as it's not into the LAN. Now that we have the camera plugged in, we'll go ahead and search the device. Normally when the camera is plugged in and makes a connection, it'll pop up and populate itself in the camera list. You can see that it went from the searched area down to being added to the recorder. You can see it is in channel D1 because I have the camera's Ethernet cable plugged in to the number 1 port. If I plugged it into 7, it would be in the D7 channel. You can see it assigns its own IP address from the switch, so there's no initialization with the camera. These are plug and plays with the NVR PoE system. So I can press Next. This is where we'll schedule our recordings for each camera. Click the gear or the cog to the right, which will bring up a page where you can select what type of recording you like to do. Depending on what smart features you plan to use with your camera will determine what you select for your scheduling. The general will be for 24 hours recording. Motion is going to be for motion detection, and intelligence is going to be for tripwire and intrusion alarms. Now that we have scheduled what we want recorded, none of the smart features will be active except the general function until we go in and set them up in the NVR. Now you can select the days or all if you want all days to be recorded and press Next. This will bring you to a screen where you can select Copy To, which will allow you to copy the scheduled recording to all cameras and then press OK. You can then press Next and then OK to complete. Installing the hard drive in the initial setup to a non-PoE NVR is identical to the one that had PoE. The differences are you have to supply power to the camera, and that is either going to be with a separate PoE switch. You can use a power plug to the camera, or you can use a power injector. You have many more options when using a non-PoE NVR, as all your cameras don't have to come back and plug into the NVR. This switch could be, for example, down in the basement, and then we would only run one cable from the location of the PoE switch back up to the router to be on the network. You could have the NVR in a separate location and either run the NVR back to the router and have that all tied in on your network. But the setup's just a little bit more involved, as you have to assign your IP addresses and initialize each camera as we install. For this demonstration, I'm going to use the PoE switch and not use the wall plug. I could use the wall plug and plug it into the camera and then plug the camera into a switch. It could be the PoE because this is a smart PoE and it will only require power when called for, or I could run the cable back to the router or a separate switch. For this case, I'm going to plug it just into the camera and power it up to the PoE switch. It takes several minutes before the power gets to the camera. In the meantime, we'll hook up the NVR to the switch so we have our own network. Now we'll take a look at how we're going to initialize and set up the camera. You can see the network interface to this NVR. You can see that I'm on segment .1 with an IP address of 200. My gateway is .1. For this demonstration, I'm going to leave DHCP off, and you can see I already changed the static IP address to .200. Click OK and then click Apply. You can right click to back out of the menu, and then you can click Camera, or you can go to the top and press the camera icon. When we bring up the camera page, you can see that the camera actually already showed up with a network of 192.168.1.108. This is the default for Dahua cameras and NVRs. We can't leave them the same because it'll make for a very confusing network configuration as it assigns the IP addresses. Even if you have a different segment assigned to your NVR, when you initialize these cameras, you'll be allowed to change the IP address at that time. And for example, you can see that the segment is .1.108 for an IP address. I'm going to change this to show you what I mean. I'm going to go back to my network and change my network card just to show you, if I was on a different segment, how these cameras will initialize to whatever I tell it to. So let's say that I had a gateway of .0.1 and my IP address, I'll assign .0 for the segment, and whatever I want to name this, I'll do 150. I'll test it. It's going to pass because there's nothing hooked up on this little network. If you have it hooked to your router and you press test, it will determine that if something is already assigned that IP address, and you won't be able to use it. So you could just change this to a different number and continue on. Press apply. I'll go back to network, and you can see that my NIC card has changed. Segment 0, IP address 150, and I made the gateway to be able to communicate on the same segment. Now I'm going to go back to the camera, and we'll add a camera. As you can see, it's on a different segment. As you recall, I just changed it to .0, and this is .1. What I'll do is I'll check the camera. I'll come up here to initialize. It'll ask me if I want to use the local password in the email as I set it up on my NVR to the cameras, and I'll just say yes and press next. At this time, it's going to ask if we want to do DHCP or static. Again, I like to assign all the cameras to a static IP address so I know that they are not changing as the router reboots or if you reboot your NVR. So at this time, I can change the segment. I'll change it to 0, and I'll change the IP address. I like to put them in order, so I know the NVR that I signed was 150, and this will be my first camera, so I'll assign it 151. The gateway also needs to be changed, and again, if we went back to our network, you can see that we want it to be the same as our network, so we're able to communicate with the WAN, the wide area network. I'll press next. It'll initialize and it'll tell you that it succeeded. Press OK. It'll still have the old IP address in here, so now you can press search device, and there is our new IP address of the camera. We'll click the camera and press add to our camera list. It'll take several seconds, and now has a new IP address and is now assigned to the NVR. You just have to think and write down your numbers so you know what the IP address is of each camera. Now we'll introduce a new camera. It's as simple as powering it up. Again, you can either use a wall plug or an Ethernet cable and a PoE switch. We'll power it up. So after plugging in the camera, you can see that there's nothing that shows up in the list. We'll go ahead and search the device, and there it is. There's our new camera. Again, the default is 192.168.1.108. So we know that the way that we have this network video recorder in our network setup, we have it on segment 0. Select the camera. We'll initialize. We'll use the same password and email. Again, what we got to do is change our segment to 0, and this is the second camera, so I like to name them 152. We'll change the segment on the gateway. We'll press next. It succeeded, and we'll press OK. We'll search device. There's our 152. We can select it and add to our device list. We'll give it a second. You can see the status turns green, and our camera should show up under live view. And there's our camera. You can see as these cameras populate, they become assigned the channel number. This will be channel 1, channel 2, and so forth. If I wanted, I could delete these and then add them in reverse order. I can remove those from the list. I can search my device. There's both cameras. If I wanted to put this second camera in the number 1 position for the view, I can click that and add. And then I can click the second camera and add. And now, under my view mode, they are swapped. I went ahead and changed the camera back to the default settings to show you what would happen if we added a camera that was not in the same segment. So I select the camera and I'll add it. You can see the status bar is red because it is on different segments and cannot communicate with the NVR.